Thank you. So as you said, the title is called the OS effect. Study into the carbohydrates, the role of carbohydrates and their effect on body composition. Okay. So the purpose of it was there are different metabolic factors of carbohydrate that leads to an increase or decrease in body fat percentage. And that was actually the purpose of my research, is filling in the gaps of current research by concentrating on finding a link between carbohydrate consumption and resistance training in overweight, sedentary adults who have a higher body fat percentage, lean muscle mass, sleep cycles, ketones, blood glucose levels, as well as cardiovascular disease. Now, my research questions, I kept it simple. What are carbohydrates? Okay, or how does carbohydrates affect body composition in overweight, sedentary adults? And as well as, are carbohydrates even necessary for health-related physical fitness in overweight, sedentary adults? Believe it or not, most people don't even know what carbohydrates are. If I tell them to stay away from carbohydrates, they ask me, their first question is, what are carbohydrates? So to answer that, so basically, like when you search anything on Google, you ask like healthy people or healthy foods, this picture will come up. I don't know about y'all, I've never been in a situation where I had to choose a salad over a cupcake. Okay, that's how they go. They like to shape your mind to think that you got to get in shape by eating greens and not necessarily cupcakes. Or I've never been in a predicament where I had to choose an apple over a hamburger. Okay, so what if I tell you you can actually get fit? Oh, this is another one that actually got me. Come on now, why does bacon have a sad face, right? I love bacon. I know a lot of people love bacon on their hamburgers, right? So what if I actually tell you that you can get fit by eating Oreo cheesecakes or a Pizookie or even chicken Alfredo, or my favorite, pizza. There's ways you can get lean, you can get fit by eating the foods that you want. You don't have to eat the fruits and things of that nature, okay? So what are carbohydrates? Anything that was created through photosynthesis. So anything that was grown from the ground, so any type of grains of that nature, they have carbohydrates in them, okay? So anything that also ends in O, so if you're looking at the ingredients label, sucralose, fructose, galactose, lactose, maltose, all those are carbohydrates, okay? So now 3 different categories of carbohydrates. The first one being monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are simple sugars. That's when the fruits and the candies. Yes, fruit and candy are both in the same category of monosaccharides. So they're both the same exact things. So you think you're getting fruit, might as well eat you a candy bar. Okay? And the next one is disaccharides, meaning milk. Well, the third category is polysaccharides. That's broken up into grains, a longer chain of carbohydrates, and they actually store as fat faster. So the purpose of carbohydrates, the main purpose of carbohydrates is to provide immediate energy. That is your body's immediate source of energy. It comes from carbohydrates. The next one is digestion. Okay, the only carbohydrate that helps with digestion is actually fiber. So if you're looking at carbohydrate, counting your net carbs, any type of fiber does not count in your net carbs, so you just subtract it. Okay, so example, if you're looking at something, reading the label, it has 3 grams of sugar and 3 grams of carbs, that has net 0 carbs. So 1 gram of sugar, 1 gram of fiber negates 1 gram of sugar. So fiber, great, okay? So carbohydrates is stored in different areas. The primary storage place for carbohydrates is in your muscle cells and in your liver. Okay, that's the immediate place where it's going to store it, in the muscle cells and in the liver. Okay, the secondary source is actually it's stored as fat, and that actually where is the purpose of my research derived from, is what metabolic factors causes those 3 different areas to take place. Okay, now the first one is being insulin. Okay, so insulin is the hormone that ignites the building process. Okay, so it builds. Unfortunately, insulin builds muscle as well as fat. Depending on what you eat, it is going to build muscle or fat, okay? Now, when you consume carbohydrates, that increases your insulin level. It spikes your insulin when you're eating carbohydrates. Carbohydrates and the spiked insulin levels increase the efficiency of storing fat, okay? So carbohydrates is the only thing that spikes insulin. And with that being said, that's when you store fat when you eat carbohydrates. Low insulin levels increase fat burning and fat mobilization, okay? So the next one is the importance of GLUT4 and GLUT12. GLUT4 and GLUT12 are glucose transporters that predominantly stores the glucose in your blood in your muscles, okay? So that's the GLUT4 and GLUT12. And so it transports glucose into the muscle tissues. Now this is very important for diabetics. Okay, so being type 2 diabetes is where the cells of the body no longer react to insulin, thus they do not absorb sugar. Okay, so when after resistance training, the muscles of diabetic subjects can absorb and burn sugar without increasing their sensitivity to insulin. So if a diabetic does not eat carbohydrates at all, and all they do is resistance training where they contracted their muscles, the glucose transporters activates and actually pulls the glucose out of the blood into the muscle cells. So it's actually reversing the effects of diabetes without having to take the medicine. So without having to take, all you have to do is not eat carbohydrates and lift weights, and you will no longer be a diabetic. Scientific proves it. All right, so the next one is cortisol. What is the purpose of cortisol? Cortisol is the stress hormone, okay? So anytime you stress, your cortisol level goes through the roof. Now, cortisol is anabolic for fat tissue and catabolic for muscle tissue. Simply, anabolic means to build, catabolic means to tear down, okay? So cortisol builds fat and eats muscle. Your natural cortisol levels rise throughout the night. So you have to get your sleep. When you sleep, your cortisol level naturally rises throughout the night, and it peaks upon waking, when you wake. Now, there's a relationship between insulin and cortisol, okay? So depending on the conditions, cortisol can be catabolic for fat tissue. Why is that? So when your insulin levels are naturally low in the morning, and your cortisol levels are naturally high in the morning, and you do not wake up, and you don't, first thing in the morning, you don't eat any carbohydrates, so your insulin levels aren't being raised, now you're mobilizing fat, okay? So when mind it, natural cortisol levels being high and insulin levels low, that inverse relationship is going to create your body to set it up to actually mobilize fat throughout the whole day. Okay, so I want y'all to remember that. Being catabolic, the relationship of insulin and cortisol, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so this actually was a study that was done in the Norwegian School of Sports Medicine in the Sports Science Department, where they took a case study where they studied 16 overweight sedentary women, and they studied in one group ate a low carbohydrate, while the other one had a higher carbohydrate. And this is actually this is an abstract from it. It says that carbohydrate restricted diets seem to improve glycemic control and other features of the metabolic syndrome, and are generally found to beneficially influence risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So not only does carbohydrates make you fat, but it also spreads cancer throughout the rest of your body. Because cancer cells actually attach themselves to sugar molecules in your blood and goes to the different livers, the different organs in your body. So when you have someone that's overweight, sedentary, somebody that's diabetic, as well as have cancer, don't eat carbohydrates, all that's gonna go away. Simple. All right, so the role of fat in ketosis, that's the next one. So dietary fat does not spike insulin, provides energy, prevents catabolism, and ketones. Now, so when you're operating on no carbohydrate, you're eating fat, okay, your body produces ketones. Okay, so ketones, when your body's in ketosis, that's extreme fat oxidation, or AKA fat burning mode. Okay, so that's actually when your body switches it and uses ketones as energy. So by avoiding carbs, it makes it difficult for fat cells to store carbs and for fat to store fat as fat. Okay, so basically, in order to get lean, you got to eat fat to burn fat. Crazy, right? It's so different. That's so different, but it's actually so simple that you got to actually have to eat fat to burn fat, and that's come from John Kiefer. He actually has a background in quantum physics. Okay. So it's simple. So after telling me all this, okay, so what do I do? Phase 1, the eating plan. So you go for 9 days without eating carbohydrates at all. 30 grams or less, that still counts as low carbs or no carbs. 9 days. And on the 10th day, that's when you actually start off eating low carbs. You have a 6 to 8 hour window where you consume any and everything that you want. Now the 6 to 8 hour window comes after 6 p.m. after you worked out. Okay, so you got your resistance training out the way, because after 5, you worked out. You consume anything, literally anything I've consumed whole pizzas, brownies, ice cream, donuts, cupcakes, you name it, Oreos, anything, I've consumed it, and I've got the leanest I've ever been in my entire life. By enjoying those foods, okay? So after you do that, the 10th time, now after you go back, you can either do 10 days again, you continue to mobilize fat, or you can do it just once a week. Okay, just once a week, you actually have a Carb-Nite. The optimum window for that is 6-month cycles. Okay, the 6-month cycle, each cycle produces more results than the previous. Okay, so when you consume the carbohydrates, when you consume it at breakfast, they're stored in fat cells. And once again, that's going back to the cortisol and the insulin levels, the relationship between cortisol and insulin when you eat carbohydrates in the morning. So honestly, I would say just prolong breakfast. Not skip it, you just prolong breakfast. You push it back a few hours when you wake up, and that's going to set your body up to mobilize fat throughout the day. You become a fat burning machine. Okay, you sleeping burning fat. You eating, you talking on the phone burning. As a matter of fact, while you eating food, you're burning fat. Crazy, right? I love it. All right, so for dinner, that's when you consume your carbohydrates. The 6 to 8 hour window when you eat it, because all your carbohydrate storage is depleted in your muscles and your liver. So when you do eat it and you spike your insulin levels, all of that is going to your muscles and in your liver. Okay, so you wake up in the morning, it's going to your muscles, you get bigger. You get those gains, what we call them. That's when you actually get bigger, by eating those carbohydrates. All right, so things you want to avoid, all bulk sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup, you want to stay away from those. You want to eat it and eat it. So for carb backloading for athletes, so it's called the Hope effect. Okay, so after you adjust to a low carbohydrate diet, the body releases adrenaline faster and muscle cells react stronger. Your psychomotor performance increase, and the nervous system fires with greater amplitude. Basically, you become a better athlete. You become faster and you become stronger because your adrenaline and stuff reacts faster. So when you train, resistance training 3 days a week, it's all simple, as long as you're doing contracting muscles, and cardio is actually not required. You do not have to do cardio. In fact, I didn't do cardio at all. I just lifted and ate. That was it, and I got the leanest. So this is where I started from, November 2013, 200 pounds, 21% body fat. No, notice, it was a carb-based diet. I did not carb backload. And to June 2014, 203 pounds, gained a little weight, but I lost a little body fat. I was still eating carbohydrates. It wasn't, notice, June 2014, the next month, July, is when I started Carb-Nite. In July, I went up to 190 pounds and I lost to 14% body fat. Crazy, in a month. 10 pounds and I went to 14% body fat in a month. Look at the difference. So this is where I was December 2014, 190, 12% body fat. Then I went to just January, 189, 9% body fat. So the total duration was a year, 2 months, but I was only doing Carb-Nite for 7 months. And I lost 14 pounds and 12% body fat. All of that coming from Carb-Nite and carb backloading. So for further research, I really want to look at, because you know a lot of people who take antidepressants, they always gain weight. You know, that's for future research. So why do people on antidepressants always gain weight? Is because the cortisol levels. Because the cortisol level, the antidepressant does not actually affect the cortisol level. It just makes them mentally feel as if they're better, feel as if they're all right, but their body's actually still stressing. So that's one of my future research, and as well as have more in-depth research on the effects of carbohydrates as well. Now this goes into one of my limitations, because I didn't have too many willing subjects to actually commit to the in-depth study. So unfortunately, myself was the only one. So of course I want to do it again and take a more in-depth look at it. Acknowledgements of Miss Daniela, McNair cohort, as well as my mentor. So is there any questions?
Yes, sir.